All right, so we're at noon. So those of you who have just joined us, welcome. I think some of you were kind of scared that we had started without you. We haven't. Let me do some introductions so everyone can understand what's going on today and who we have at the table. For those of you who haven't met me, I'm Christina Morgan. I'm a partner here at Vile Fotheringham. Been here for about 10 years. Um, I I've been doing HOA law not quite as long, but my life, as far as my professional life, has been dominated by poop, parking, and paint, which I think are the three things that normally HOAs go through. Of course, water is a huge issue, particularly for my firm, which has picked up a lot of water work in up north. We have offices in other states, including Oregon. We just reopened Idaho, and we have, of course, Colorado, Arizona, and then our Portland office. I have a special guest today who you guys have been you've heard talking. With me is Tim Blake. Tim, you know, say hello to everyone.
Hello, everybody.
Tim, I've met Tim. He is from you own Landcare Unlimited, right? And
Yes,
how long have you owned Landcare?
25 long years.
25 long years. So Tim's here to talk about the technology and water conservation. I'm a lawyer. I don't pretend to know anything about irrigation or artificial turf or any of that jazz. So I'm here for the legal aspect, and Tim is here to talk about um some of the programs that we have for water conservation, and the technology is ever changing, and I certainly know very little about irrigation and all that fun stuff. So uh let me give you an overview of the presentation today. Little fun quote from Water World. uh So Tim and I were talking about, prior to starting the seminar, about water. And if you go onto the web and you Google Arizona and water issues, you're going to come up with a whole different slew of articles, and it's somewhat hard to decipher that about the issue of water scarcity. I mean, obviously Arizona is part of the desert. If you're living here, I hope you've noticed that we don't get much rainfall. um, but there's a difference in the types of water. Much of the state's surface water comes from the Colorado River, which water has been over allocated from the Colorado for many years. And so we have dwindling surface water as far as the Colorado River is concerned. We've had levels of drought. You've probably seen a bunch of articles on Lake Mead, which is one of the main reservoirs for the Colorado River, and how that reservoir had dropped to historic low. We have surface water, we have groundwater. So we rely on groundwater, and of course, groundwater levels have been declining. I guess I should put my phone on mute here. That's what you have when you have internet based. I guarantee you this person's going to call back. Let me put on do not disturb. Okay. So you have surface water, you have groundwater, and then of course you have potable water that, our population has to, we need drinking water. And Arizona's population, as you all know, has been steadily increasing over the last few decades, putting strain on, our water resources. And of course, as the population increases, demand's going to increase. Tim, you want to add anything about the different sources of water here?
We have, for anybody who manages a larger HOA, Christina knows this well. We have a couple of very large HOAs that had rights to SRP water to be purchased by the acre foot. And so Christina would research whether those legal rights actually exist. And we're in the middle of a project on another HOA where that becomes relevant. If you've got a lot of acreage in terms of plants and turf to water, buying your water by the acre foot is a small fraction of what your potable water costs. and your return on investment is huge if you can access that water. Basically, you're buying water by the acre foot like the farmers and even golf courses do. So that would be a big one if you have access to that. And that would be something Christina might be able to help you determine if your HOA has those rights.
In the chat, someone says define large. I mean, we were talking about so we're saying that generally, so SRP has a lot more access to water. Like, I don't know that people, HOAs that have their water supply provided by SRP are in better shape, most likely, than HOAs that get it from municipalities like the city of Phoenix, for instance. SRP can sell water cheaper and has a greater supply of it than the local municipalities. And so that's what Tim was talking about. Tim and I have an association that we've been helping on a water conservation project where they are getting water. They're currently getting water from the city of Phoenix. They have water rights to get it from SRP, but they don't have the infrastructure to get the water from SRP. They have the legal rights to it. And in that association, we are talking about 26 acres of common area. So it is quite large common area, but it's like return on investment. The infrastructure is very costly to put in new infrastructure to get a supply of water. Sometimes it's costly. Sometimes some other associations, we have an association, or Tim knows of an association where they had a pond already available to dump SRP water in it and then pump it out. And so it wasn't as expensive for the infrastructure for that association, but we'll get into that later. I just want to make sure that everyone kind of understands that there are different types of water. There's surface water, there's groundwater, there's potable water, and not everybody gets their water from the same place.
Right. And potable water is something that you could literally drink. And if you see an HOA or any commercial building that has purple colored valve box lids, that usually tell you it's reclaimed, which just means it's still coming from the city, but it's on a special line and it's not nearly as processed or refined. It's not drinkable, but it's a lot less expensive. It's metered at a much lower rate. So if you have access to that, and you would use a different type of irrigation valve, what we call a dirty water valve that doesn't get clogged up when you're using non-potable water. So yeah, that would be one other level in between potable and surface.
So HOAs obviously are in a better position for managing and maintaining common areas and landscaping and irrigation. So HOAs are in control. So they're in the better position for water conservation, maybe even better, more so than individual homeowners. So there are different strategies that we can talk about here. Let me change this slide. I don't know that this is actually changing on the, all right.
It's not on the main screen.
Yeah, apparently it's not changing for me. Let's see if we can change. There we go. I've included this, this quote from Waterworld because we had this conversation prior to the start of the seminar about the government strategy for reducing water uses to make it more expensive, right? And just like the same strategy has been worked for tobacco use, for soda use, you tax it, you increase the price, people will consume less. So that's the government strategy. I think the difference is that nobody can live without water. I mean, certainly there are some opinion wise of what water is a necessity, and what water use isn't a necessity. I think there's going to be a continued conversation about reducing water, obviously, in places that it isn't necessary. So let's talk about water and its importance. Obviously, water affects everything: health, access to food, the growth of our economy, education. We all know that. I mentioned earlier that there is an increase in demand for water with the increasing population, and that's how many we have approximately in the state of Arizona. Okay, there we go. All right, our water conservation strategies. These are all strategies that we've probably seen in your different HOAs, depending if you're a manager or board member. Tim, you want to talk about the first one and your
Sure.
experience
The
with your
term xeriscape, yeah, you bet. There's two reasons most people xeriscape. The first one is water conservation, but also, especially with older communities, smaller condo and townhouse, multi-unit housing that was designed in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. It's surprising, and I'm sure plenty of people on the call have those types of properties under their management. And it's shocking that we've always had to deal with conservation of water in the desert, but when they designed those properties back during that time period, it's like almost like water was free and plentiful. There was zero thought given to conservation. So what we find the other reason is, besides using less water, is I'm sure many of you have had to deal with the budgetary gut punch of having to repaint and restucco because water hitting and staining and ruining the sides of buildings. So that would really be one of the other reasons that we xeriscape, is to get the water away from the building. And at the same time, we're picking up substantial savings. One of the strategies that I found to be xeriscaping most effective is there are sometimes, and this is a classic mistake I see every time, is where someone starts xeriscaping maybe 10 or 15 feet away from a building, and they're just tapping off some sprinkler heads. Maybe they attach drip irrigation multi-port, and they're combining drip irrigation and water sprinklers or turf sprinklers on the same valve. Big mistake, because those plants in turf require two very different water schedules, and it's always a struggle to get that right. What we tend to do is we, in conjunction with the property manager and the client, we let the existing valves, to a certain degree, dictate the area that we're going to xeriscape. So when you turn on the valve, you can flag out a sprinkler head and say, this is an area that we are going to xeriscape. And it doesn't work all the time, but generally speaking, it's a good strategy. And why is that? Because you're retasking that valve from a turf valve and turning it into, de facto, a plant and tree valve, which is standalone, runs on a completely different schedule. And then it's a simple matter of converting that piece of real estate to just plants without massive expenditures for plumbing underground. It's an inexpensive way. If the lay of the land is cooperative, it's an inexpensive way to do that without having to spend a bunch of money on irrigation refit.
Just so we distinguish xeriscaping from artificial turf, the former involves using drought-resistant plants and landscaping techniques like Tim has mentioned here, to reduce water usage. You can reduce water consumption with drought-resistant plants that require less water than traditional landscaping. So you're still enhancing the biodiversity and reduce the need for pesticides and fertilizers. And so I think that's probably xeriscaping is probably a little more attractive than artificial turf, just in the sense that artificial turf is not alive, right? There's no biodiversity with artificial turf. There has been a lot of talk lately with artificial turf that plant communities can't ban the installation of artificial turf. There are certain exceptions. This is the statute that you need to look at. There are exceptions for certain communities that have, you'll have to read the statute. There are certain exceptions for certain communities, for instance, that have like unique landscaping. We have a community in Tempe that we represent that has these beautiful pecan trees. You say pecan. I've been corrected once in my language today. They have these trees, these special trees. So this statute might not necessarily apply to them, but it is a conversation and shows the trend in the law where we're going to adopting water conservation practices, including installation of artificial turf. Now, the board can put restrictions and some rules in place about artificial turf. And I got some education on the different types of artificial turf from Tim last week. And how artificial turf has really come a long way as far as technology is concerned. So the board can make rules that talk about the quality of the turf. So I think we have some questions here in the chat, and you can address this too, Tim, about mulch. Is there any, I guess there's any pros and cons to using mulch versus rock? And there's a question about,
yes.
yes, and then I have another question. So we'll follow up on that. What's the shelf life of artificial turf, and does it create a heat island?
You bet. Sorry, I was momentarily disconnected. I was panic diving to get back in. So mulch is not commonly used in Arizona as much as rock. And quick delineation point: xeriscaping is the general vernacular is that you're using the term xeriscaping for granite with plants versus a lot of folks use the term desert scaping for decomposed granite and succulents and cactus. So, but for the general purposes of our water conservation conversations, we'll kind of use that term synonymously. Mulch is really important when you're planting new plants and trees because it gathers a moisture around the root ball of a plant. But outside of playground mulch, for safety for kids playing in playground equipment, it's not really commonly used in Arizona or in warmer climates for bedding material as much as granite is. It's just because it dries out so fast and it'll blow away. So in Arizona, where I'm assuming we're all pretty much located, granite is the preferred medium. Now, different sizes, different colors, different types, that's a whole conversation. And I'm happy to answer any conversations during the Q&A or off book through email or other phone calls. So quickly moving to the shelf life of artificial turf. This is really where that improvement that I was talking about before the call started. The cost of turf has come down considerably, but most importantly, the quality of the turf has increased greatly. Even the warranties have caught up to the quality. We use a product exclusively called Tiger Turf because it just doesn't fade. And when I say doesn't, there's Tiger Turf that's been out there for over 20 years, and the color's still like it was brand new, and it isn't dry rotting. The cheaper turfs that you can save a little bit of money, but the lower quality products, the backs rot, so the turf falls out in I've seen it happen in 5 or 6 years. But a solid quality turf, you can expect 20 to 30 years minimum, and I think much longer, but there just hasn't been enough time for these higher quality products to be on the ground to be able to answer that question truthfully. But importantly, the warranties with a product like Tiger Turf, they don't dissipate as time's arrow advances. As you go through your time horizon, most artificial turf warranties start knocking off, like 5% a year. So after 10 years, you've only got 50% of your warranty, your original warranty, versus like a product like Tiger Turf, materials and labor, it's a 20-year warranty. So if something happens in year 19, it doesn't cost you anything. And that's a really important component because you'll have 10% of your warranty and it won't cover labor. So the warranty becomes worthless as time advances in a lot of lower quality turfs. So it's definitely for the product. and for the warranty, it's good to spend a little bit of extra money up front. But some of these products, I would say 30 years. Mine's been in my yard for 9 years, and it looks as good as the day I put it down.
What's
So,
the price point,
and one
Tim?
other,
What's the price point,
well,
Tim,
it depends on who you deal with. Yeah, when I buy turf, I'm usually buying the actual grass itself, and this is important when you're pricing this stuff out. The grass is anywhere from $2.50 to $3.50 per square foot, and that's 3 different blade heights, cut at 3 different heights, and nice brown thatch woven in between, so it looks more real and it stands up, and it's got a 3M backing made by 3M so it doesn't rot. So that grass costs us, let's just round up and say $3 a foot. But it's the prep work. If you're going to cut out your existing Bermuda, you want to use a sod cutter and you want to kill it with Fusillade. So you want to chemical kill it and you want to cut it out. And then you've got to backfill with granite, decomposed granite. We don't really use sand anymore. So you're backfilling 3-4 inches of DG to have a nice solid base, and then you roll your carpet on top of that. Of course, there's irrigation capping. You might want to put down a weed barrier so Bermuda doesn't grow back through it. So that prep, to land the plane and answer the question, you can range for all of that prep and material. $7 a square foot is a really good price. But you could pay $10, $11 depending on what vendor you go through. I would ballpark this between $8 and $9 a foot is a solid price for quality product.
I had no idea. I do know that it's expensive, but I guess the question is how much are you potentially saving in water, and the price per square foot to water is obviously going to depend on the type of what you're watering.
Right. That coupled with the fact that you're maybe going to save a little bit on maintenance expense, and because it's almost carefree, other than taking a blower and blowing it off, you don't have to do much. I guess the only downside, as far as at an HOA, and some of the managers here might have had that experience, is potential vandalism or someone just dropping a lit cigarette on it. You have to. Those human behaviors are problematic, but it is easy to splice in a replacement segment if somebody does something dumb and damages the turf. But it is expensive, but your ROI in your water, as time advances, that payback gets to be higher and higher and higher. I will crowbar in 2 components that have been a knock on artificial turf in the past. The first one is pet waste, whether it's urine or feces. They do have products now that are pet fill, and this just basically looks like kitty litter. We just throw it on top and we broom it in, and it sinks to the bottom of the base. And it between that and the copper slag, it makes the stalks of grass stand up. But that pet fill wipes out all of that odor. There's no odor, and you only have to put that stuff down. It's not expensive, every 3 or 4 years. And then the other product that's come out in the last couple of years, which is really kind of neat, is, artificial turf in Arizona can get a little warm in the summertime. So you have these gel pellets you can throw on top of there, and you just soak it with your hose, and they retain water, and they lower the actual temperature of the turf by as much as 20 degrees. So kids and animals can play on it in the heat of the summer, and then it slowly over time dissipates that water, and then you just reload with the hose, and it keeps that turf nice and cool. So it is a lot more functional than it used to be with those amendments.
Well, so we talked about turf. Make sure I have no other questions here about turf. Oops, I'm going too fast. I hit my thing. So maybe the segue into that. So we're talking about xeriscaping, and think another strategy is these low flow fixtures. HOAs can require or incentivize homeowners to install low flow fixtures such as toilets, shower heads, and faucets. I've seen a lot more in condominium associations of requiring low flow fixtures. And also condominium associations, I've seen more data on water audits. That's another tool for assessing how much water is used. And water audits, not just in condominium associations and what's used in the home, but also irrigation management. Back to Tim, and that as far as adjusting the time and frequency of irrigation. I don't know how many times you walk by a property and people haven't checked the sprinkler heads and they're watering the sidewalk, or they're watering too frequently. And Tim, is there any fun technology that's changed in recent years as far as irrigation management and timing? Like, I know that I have some of my managers that control that stuff by phone, sensor wise. I mean, what products are out there?
Yeah, that's really been the game changing aspect in landscaping in the last probably 3-4 years. And I will take just half a second and mention from an irrigation standpoint, a low flow fixture. This works at newer HOAs and older HOAs. Some of you may or may not have heard of MP rotors, Mary Paul rotors. And they're basically, it's a special type of sprinkler nozzle that just screws into the top of an existing pop-up sprinkler, and they can throw as far as 35, 40 feet. So they're a long throw, and it's just a nozzle that screws in, retrofits most existing sprinkler heads, so it's not expensive. And what it does, it's the equivalent of putting your finger over the end of a garden hose and spraying further. So what it does and how it saves water, especially if your ground isn't level, because as we all may know, that when you're trying to water the side of a hill in turf areas, you can spend as much as 30% more in water to irrigate and water the side of a hill, because of course you're throwing it up like a backspin on a golf shot. You're throwing water up the hill and it just shoots back down to the bottom because of gravity, and it's a huge waste of water. So if you can regulate the precipitation rate of a sprinkler head hitting an uneven surface, you don't gather all of that water at the bottom of the basin. So the idea is to drink what you take, in that the precip rate or the precipitation rate of these sprinklers is 1/3 of normal. So the ground soaks in what it needs. It's much more efficient. Now, this is a very inexpensive, immediate way to improve your situation without spending a bunch of money, and to more effectively water, particularly turf, that's not flat. So you just screw in these MP rotors. They put the water down 1/3 as fast. Yeah, you have to run the sprinklers a little bit longer, but you're saving. It's about a 40% savings, and only because you're not ponding and puddling and you're soaking in real time. So I wanted to crowbar that in there because that's a takeaway from this conversation, an immediate something your landscaper or we can come out, and I can even demonstrate it. I keep them in my truck. I can screw them in 5 seconds and show you how they work. But they're a huge water saver. And for the newer HOAs, where some of the builders are putting in smaller backflows, they're not putting in 2-inch backflows anymore. They're tired of paying, as a developer, the higher fees and sewage fees and meter fees associated with these larger meters. So there's a lot of builders around, especially doing infill projects, that are putting in these really tiny backflows. And you almost have to have those MP rotors, or you don't have enough water pressure and flow to water all of your grass. So if you do have a pressure or flow problem at one of your properties, this will also resolve that. And again, we can have a longer conversation off book about this. So, but back to what Christina was referring to, we have entered into a premier partnership with a company called Weathermatic. Now, there are lots of them out there, lots of companies, Hunter, Toro, Baseline. We've sold them all, we've serviced them all, but I'm really impressed with this company, Weathermatic, and I made a significant financial commitment to them because of how their system works. So every single irrigation timer has its own local weather station. We've just installed 3 of them at an HOA, and it seems excessive to have 3 different weather stations in a medium-sized property. But the weather does change, as you know. You could be raining on one side of the property and nothing on the other. So it's taking real inputs and it's using an algorithm, and the water savings have been astounding. I didn't believe when they said we can save you 25 to 35% of your water bill with a Weathermatic system, smart timer, smart controller. You've probably heard that terminology. And I said, that's just too much. I don't believe it. Well, we went ahead and installed a few of these things, and we saved significantly more than that. So we started putting these things in. As a matter of fact, on newer properties, we're rolling Weathermatic smart timers in as part of our offering. We're not charging the clients for them. They pay the annual subscription fee for the internet, but because the landscaper benefits immensely as well. Now, briefly, here's the benefits. So not only are you getting local weather inputs, and it's only watering when it needs water, and of course we all have seen lawn sprinklers running in the middle of a rainstorm, and that irritates everybody. Bad optics. You'll all get calls from your board members about wasting water on that one, right? You've all been there. But the other part of it is it's using sensors, flow sensors, it's using weather stations, it's using actual real-time data at that property, as if you had an individual standing at the timer constantly dinking with the timer and adjusting it for optimal efficiency. But here's where it really pays off. We all know that our mainline irrigation breaks only happen on Saturday night at 2 a.m. when no one's watching. That's Murphy's Law. I actually subscribe to O'Shaughnessy's Law that says Murphy's an optimist. But this system, when you put in what's called a master control valve right by the backflow, and a flow sensor, if the system sees overflow or unscheduled flow, that meaning there's water going through that sensor when it's not supposed to have it running, it shuts the whole system down and tells you where it's leaking. And then it sends a push notification to any email or cell phone that is on, that's in the loop. And so the property manager, maybe the landscape chair, certainly the landscaper, it shuts it down so you're not wasting water, and then lets everybody know. That is as good as you can get, and the master control valve is what turns it all off. And back to what Christina said, if I want just simple irrigation checks, my man can walk around with a tablet or his phone and run every single sprinkler valve and make sure it just takes the efficiency so much better. So your actual hard costs for your irrigation checks and they plummet because it's so much easier to do that. The excuses from your landscaper, there can't be anymore. They have no excuse not to perform. But the main thing is you're only watering when you have to. It's an immediate cessation of watering upon an unscheduled water flow or break. And the control, it even gives you a web portal that's very intuitive. It's easy to see, where, as we've all experienced paying water bills for associations, especially during COVID, they weren't reading actual meter readings. They were taking estimates, and it's aggravating, because why should you pay for water you didn't use? Some sort of estimate? No, what you can look on the portal, and it actually register by valve and cumulatively for any time period you want to put in there your actual water use, the gallons that flew past that flow meter. So you can keep the water companies honest, and they do make mistakes. So.
Great. All right. I think we have some questions about legally, how does an HOA require low flow fixtures? Of course, I'm gonna give you the lawyer answer here. You got to find some authority in your documents. You may not have authority. I've seen boards say, well, the documents let us change, certain components. Others have said, hey, the association will purchase the component if you pay for installation. So they've offered incentives to homeowners where it's like a win-win. I see this a lot with more efficient water tanks, for instance, and water tanks that have the pans and sensors for water leaks, you see boards will say, hey, we'll buy, the certain components or we'll even pay for the cost. But it's going to come down to see what authority you have. And a lot of documents haven't caught up with the times and technology. So you might want to go out to council, and which segues me into the next topic about water submetering. This is no different. I've seen a bunch of associations where the association pays in bulk for all the water in the community. And I've seen it certainly come up in the context where associations were upset where somebody used more water than others, particularly with snowbirds leaving and not using water for months at a time, and then other people who are there living full time using a ton more water. So some associations have come to me and said, hey, Christina, would our docs allow us to put in sub meters? Some have, some haven't. Some documents have been kind of gray, and we've had a big court fight. I had one litigation years ago where the board had to ask a court to declare whether it had the right to install submeters because it started passing back the actual cost of water to homeowners versus telling them to pay some sort of estimate over time of the water that the association thought that they would use. And of course, that's very difficult when you don't have a measurement of what everyone's use is, or you have budgets, as you know, and you set assessments based on the anticipation of using so much water and for the price staying relatively the same. So water submetering has been quite the tool, but there are definitely legal pitfalls, and you have to look whether you have authority in your documents. Some documents are very specific, and they'll say the association has a right to put in certain utilities, and others are not. So let's look here.
Right. And if I could dovetail onto that, by the way, quick question from the chat. Yes, the system does require electricity, but there are solar options. So for new developments or areas where there's no electricity, that's easy. We do solar all the time. And if you have questions like that and you think this is something, look, this is an opportunity for me to get in front of you all. And I'm just looking to earn a place at the conversation. And what I do a lot during the day is I meet with property managers on properties, and I take an assessment and I put a report together that you can give to your boards and say, look, here's what it costs. Here's what we think you can save, and yeah, a firm proposal based on a property specific assessment. So that, if anybody's interested in that, we certainly can do that. Limitations like electricity, we've got workarounds constantly on that. But back over to the submetering for a moment. So in older properties, one where we just installed a weathermatic system on a grant, and I can be very specific about the grant money, the irrigation and the building water was actually commingled together. So this HOA had no idea really what they were spending. They couldn't parse between the two. How much was landscaper? And look, I hate to admit this, but landscapers have some things in common in that if we're not held accountable for water consumption, we're going to throw as much water in the summertime as we can to make at things to make sure everything looks right so we don't get in trouble. Now, that's a lazy, broad brush statement, but there is some truth to it. So parsing out, submetering out with its own meter and own backflow irrigation water from building residential consumption is critical. And that's also every week when our crews are on property, on a weekly property, for example, we're flipping that meter lid just to make sure there's no rent use being registered through the meter when the system's not. That tells us that there's a leak somewhere, and then we need to go investigate that. That's a quick and dirty, cheap, easy check. But the submetering puts accountability on the residents and on the landscaper. So if you have commingled buildings or commingled irrigation and residential use, it's hard to get a hold of that. You can save all the money you want on irrigation, and you're still not doing anything about excessive building use. And we see a lot of that.
There are legal fights that come with sub-metering, and I'll give you another example. And this is just a caution. Yeah, you should do your homework on legally whether you have the right to sub-metering, I think, before you go out and have these conversations on the costs. We had a sub-metering issue between a sub-association and a master association years ago, where the master was taking care of the landscaping on the common areas, but the same meter measured water that went to the individual lots in a sub association. So there was this weird cost sharing agreement, and the question came up of whether or not we could sub meter the water. And the consensus was that legally we probably could. Now, whether we should and whether that was going to be easy was another question. The practical part was really hard logistically of splitting the water. And so there are practical considerations and there were legal issues. If you're sharing water, not just residential with the association, but also sub associations to association. So, and there might be two sets of documents in play there, both the sub association documents and the master's documents as well. So we've had a couple questions in the chat about SRP programs, and there are a bunch of different SRP programs that incentivize water efficient irrigation, for instance, other water conservation. There was a question in the chat about how SRP provides programs to individual consumers. And is there any program we know of that measures individual homes in an HOA community and would offer incentives to the individual users as well as the HOA for encouraging in-home low flow fixtures? I don't know the answer to that specific question. Maybe you do, Tim. I know that there's like a modern irrigation modernization program. There's definitely a lot of irrigation programs about incentives for HOAs in particular to upgrade irrigation systems to more efficient models. I know SRP gives some HOAs like up to $1,500 per acre for specific upgrades, and there's applications with SRP to show that you complied with the program requirements to get the money. There's also SRP programs on weather-based irrigation controllers, where SRP will offer rebates to HOAs that install weather-based irrigation controllers. These controllers use weather data to adjust the irrigation schedule based on current conditions. So you're going to reduce wasting water depending on, if it's raining outside, right? And it's my understanding the SRP is offering about $40 per controller for up to 250 controllers. And then the smart irrigation controllers, there's rebates from SRP to install these smart irrigation controllers. These use soil moisture sensors and data from the soil moisture sensors to optimize the irrigation schedule. And I think that's the same type of as the weather-based irrigation, where it's $40 per controller up to 250 controllers. And I think the last one that I knew about that I didn't mention here was that there's a water efficient landscape rebate program with SRP. You have to check on these. This program provides rebates for HOAs that replace high water use turf with low water use plants, trees, and shrubs. So encouraging biodiversity, like I talked about earlier. And I think the limitation is up to $30,000 in rebates per year. You've got to HOA has to submit a landscape plan for approval with SRP and comply with SRP's program requirements. So it's out there. SRP, in my experience, has been really nice to work with. They have a very nice counsel, SRP, who also can assist or point the association in the right direction if you're interested in buying SRP water to irrigate your common areas versus receiving it from a municipality like the city of Phoenix. Tim, what's your experience? Do you have any other experience that you could add on these SRP programs?
I do. Not so much with the individual homeowners. We don't do residential, but I mean individual single family residential. But and this is something that everybody's jumping on board. Almost any agency that has regulatory power or supplies water is jumping on the rebate program bandwagon. I'll give a very specific example. Those of you that have properties in the city of Glendale, I feel compelled to give a shout out to the city of Glendale. And they have 4 dedicated water conservation staff members. And these people have been fantastic to work with. They first of all, they give you a $1,500 rebate on your HOA's water bill just by signing up for their audit program. So if you're in Glendale, and I can research other municipalities, although Phoenix didn't seem to, they have a program, but they're not as advanced as Glendale. And I'm trying to find out what other cities have this high level of service. But they gave a $1,500 rebate to a client for just signing up for the water rebates, where they get monthly reports. And in some cases, in some cases, that signing up for that audit is mandatory to get any rebate from anyone. So that's where you start. And then from there, like for example, the city of Glendale said, well, we have a federal grant from the Department of the Interior, the Bureau of Land Management, and they were substantially even higher than SRPs. And what's nice is that you can get SRP money and other agency money. So this particular HOA got a $7,500 rebate on their brand new smart controller system, and the smart controller system only cost them $9,800. So it was almost paid for, and 85% paid for. And then the ROI on the water savings, in 3 months, they'll have all their money back. So that was part one of the grant. And then of course, the city of Glendale also had a xeriscape conversion grant from turf to desert or granite with plants. So all in, they spent another probably $6,000 or $7,000 converting an area to xeriscaping from turf. And water savings aside, I think they got back the $1,500 for the monitoring sign up, and then another $2,800 from Glendale. Now that program was xeriscaping was the city of Glendale. And by the way, I see in the chat, Maureen, I'll share all of this stuff with you, and I'll put it all, whether it's, I send it through Christina, we're all in this fight together, right? So, and I can even do a lot of the groundwork, but it's the cities offer some of their grants. And I saw the comment about the city of Chandler, and I agree. But also the federal grants are not available directly to you as a property manager or to your HOA. They must be funneled through the city. So you would contact the city where the HOA is located, and the Fed gives the city the money, and the city cuts a check to the HOA through the property management company. So all this money, they come out, they do an assessment. There's some documentation you have to provide, receipts and photos. They come out, take a few photos to make sure everything's in the ground, and within 30 days you have your money back. So the city of Glendale, literally, this client spent about a little over 15 grand between the xeriscaping and the smart timer system, and they got about just under 13,000 of that back, and they get all the water savings. So, and that's just because they have smart, dedicated staff in the city who are a pleasure to deal with and very responsive. They almost give city workers a good name again. But Joanna Toms and Ann Staley are their names in case you ever have anything in Glendale. But they're just so thorough and so great to work with. And it was really easy. And I know that doesn't jive with city, but it was easy, it was fast, and it was a pleasure to save that money. So again, I'll share all of that, all the forms, all the process. The emails are not even proprietary. I'm happy to share with the group the actual email back and forth so you can get a better flavor of the process.
Oh, fun. So, outlook for the future. Is it always the lawyer's job to be the doomsday person here? I feel like you're the you're the light in this seminar here. Um, Tim mentioned
I'm
that
not used to that, Christina. That's a new one.
Tim mentioned that that this is a fight. I mean, it is somewhat, we're all in it together in the sense that the whole water issue is here for a while. It's part of the conversation. It's a conversation at our legislature. It's a conversation, in the trenches with us. We have more population growth, more housing. It's just going to come up. There are more opportunities, I guess, for water conservation. We obviously have some climate change, and water scarcity and drought conditions would affect our water conservation. And our aging infrastructure. I think a lot of the challenges that Arizona is starting to see is particularly with our communities and not just landscaping, right? Our communities are getting older. Arizona is a very young state, and I think other states that are most states have a more developed body of law just because they're older and have seen issues. And I think the aging infrastructure and landscaping obviously are going to continue. There'll always be a topic of conversation for associations because water is normally the largest expense for associations. Landscaping is their biggest contract. Hopefully it's your biggest expense, and it isn't legal. You don't want legal to be your biggest expense for sure. Some parting thoughts for us, Tim, on any of these strategies on water conservation?
Yes, I think that actually Melinda from Trestle brought something up. Every city that is serious about this, like, by the way, Melinda, Andrew at Goodyear, he's great. I just good mouthed him to Mayor Jill Pizzillo the other day. Don't forget, though, if you're going for turf conversion money, there's also almost always smart controller money. But a word of caution, these grants are annually renewable. It's my understanding there's about $900 million nationally, and the cities have to request the money from the Fed, and then you request it from the city. And that there are, so these are first come, first serve, and that's an important point. And I believe that clock resets every July 1. So it now's about the time to at least get your ducks in a row to get some of this money in your next, I guess, if we want to say July 1 fiscal year. So I would strongly encourage you to do that. And like I said, you can always reach out and I can help walk you through that stuff. But the cities are being compelled from the citizens and from the state and quite frankly, the utilities, this water thing, all doom and gloom. It ain't getting any better. And, farmers and golf courses, yes, they are the highest users. But when you've got older designed retention basins, like I have at some of my larger HOAs, they're starting to suggest that these turf retention basins, which might also double as play parks and common use dog walking areas, you might not want to use those. But if you aren't showing that you're doing everything you can to conserve water, then you're going to have the flavor of this is you're going to have to defend yourselves or defend being able to retain these grass common area spaces, unlike the newer communities that are being rolled out where they're small, specific, curb encased boutique parks, and then everything else is granite and trees and plants throughout the community. these wide swaths of majority of turf, they're going away. You don't even see them in contemporary designs for that reason. But the next thing, and this is the real gut punch for these smaller, older associations, maybe that don't have the rooftop count that where the dollars are there, they're going to be compelled. I don't know what that looks like. That's Christina's legal area, not mine. But I hear a scuttlebutt with some of my government contacts that they're actually talking about having to go back to some of these HOAs and somehow mandate, I don't know how the legal works on that, but mandate that you get rid of some of this grass. It's coming. So I'll doom and gloom you with that. But again, this technology, the last thing I wanted to throw out there, and I'm happy to disseminate one other club in our bag of tricks, are soil amendments. And there's terms like biochar, and CBX is a product we use that open up the soil like gypsum does, and it makes much more efficient use of water. So soil amendments and chemical treatments, that liquid aeration, we'll call it, that, and certain landscaping practices, and I haven't even gotten into sustainable landscape management practices that some of you might be aware of through the Arizona Landscape Contractors Association. They have a certification program called SLM, Sustainable Landscape Management, and it has to do with, instead of the manicured plant trimmings, fewer plants being allowed to grow out into their natural blooming forms, besides looking a lot better because they look like they're supposed to be, and there's much longer blooming cycles. SLM trimming standards can save 20 to 25% in water. And you throw in these chemical soil amendments, and then you throw in some of this technology, and all of a sudden, realistically, not blue sky, you're talking about cutting your water bill in half. So if you approach this from a multi-pronged approach with somebody who's done it a lot, and I have, you can really, at the very least, keep the cost contained and keep pace with inflation and rate increases.
Just so you all know, my partner Quentin Cups is on the Legislative Action Committee for CAI. So he gets to go down and have all these conversations at the legislature when these bills get introduced and comment on them. CAI has a lobbyist. And so please, come to our seminars on the legislative updates, because he'll be talking about that stuff. And he and I are keeping an eye on the upcoming legislation. I agree with Tim that it's coming. So stay tuned and let's pay attention. And so today was a really general framework, although, thank you, Tim, for giving us the nitty gritty on some of these programs and options for water conservation. Thank you guys for sharing your lunch hour with us. If you have any follow-up questions for us, please don't hesitate to email Terry Rodriguez. I put Tim's contact information in the chat. So Tim, you're a little popular man today. You'll probably get blown up after this. I appreciate everybody's time.